Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to Romania once again and we're going to have a look at yet another of the Minya beers. So first and foremost, a massive shout out and thank you to my friend Minya who dropped off a box of Romanian beer with me when he was visiting Sweden recently. We've just been gradually working our way through these over the last couple of videos. So big thank you once again to Minya for making this one and the other Romanian ones possible, and I hope that you guys are enjoying this little mini series of Romanian beers that we're doing as well. But yeah, for this review then, we have a beer that I think will be very interesting. We're going to stick to the Bucharest area for this one, and I have to say I'm very, very curious about this. So yeah, for this one, we are going to have a look at my first beer from Oriel Beer. This one is their Quadrupel original version. We'll talk about that in a minute. It comes in at 10.3% ABV, and you already know what style this one is. So yeah, I should also point out that this is their flagship beer, which again is another unusual thing. But yeah, I think this could be really interesting. I never would have thought that I would have come across a Romanian brewed quadruple at this point in the channel's history. I didn't think this would exist yet, because from what I had heard, the Romanian craft beer scene was still in its infancy, if you like, but definitely very, very cool. When it comes to the kind of Belgian Abbey style beers, as you'll know if you've watched for the channel for any length of time, my favourites are the Quadruple, the Triple, and I do enjoy a good Belgian blonde as well. So it's always nice to try these styles of beer from different places. But yeah, like I say, a Romanian brewery with their flagship beer being a Quadruple. Never would have thought I'd had that. I would have had that here on the channel. But yeah, I think this should make for a very, very interesting review, and I'm certainly really curious to see how it turns out. So fingers crossed it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one, the Oriel Quadruple. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Oriel Beer. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned. Hopefully not the last though, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the home page and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Romanian beers that I'm reviewing for you. That's being added to quite gradually at the moment because we're just working our way through the Minya beers, and I do have one or two others as well. But as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about Oriel Beer, and I will apologise in advance for any bad Romanian pronunciations in this video because it's a language I am not really familiar with in the slightest. But anyway, Oriel Beer, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Bucharest, the Romanian capital, and the company was founded back in 2015. So the two behind the company are Laurențiu Mandrila and Ioana Coca. Ioana comes from a background in sales, and she worked for the Romanian clothing brand Murmur for a number of years, whereas Laurențiu owned a production company, a record company, and produced music for quite a while. So quite an unusual background, these guys. One of the more quirky ones that I've come across in my 8 years of beer tubing now. But the couple were big fans of drinking Belgian beers, and so they started homebrewing their own back in around 2010. They did very, very small batches, and over the years they just gradually developed more recipes. But they started taking part in homebrewing competitions in various countries across the Balkans, and they won a few awards from what I understand, and this is what got them thinking about going commercial. So in 2015 they decided to go for it and started up their own company, and they took the name Oriel from the archangel of light, wisdom, illumination and the sun, and of course the kind of religious element, if you like, was because these are Abbey style beers. But they began to build up the brewery from scratch. It took them about 2 years to do this, and they released their first commercial beers in 2017. These guys focus solely on Belgian style beers, or Abbey beers I guess we could say, Belgian and Abbey style beers, and the brewery can produce around 20,000 litres per year, but they do have plans to expand in the near future from what I understand. The article I read was from around the end of 2019, so it could be possible that they've done that already. I couldn't find anything else more up to date from that, even when I was, flicking through the social media and stuff like that. But as of July 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 40 different kinds of beer, and as I say, they focus on these kind of Belgian style Abbey beers, if you like. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Oriel Beer for the moment. Certainly cool to have these guys on the channel at such an early point in their history, and I'm always game to try quadruples from new places. But yeah, that's all I can say. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, go and check those out. But let's get on and actually have a taste of this beer then. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. So as you can see, there is Oriel, the Archangel of Light and everything like this. But yeah, you can see the brewery symbol just sitting on top of that. But yeah, plain sort of silver bottle cap on the top there, and it tells you a little bit on the side about the beer as well. So Quadrupel. What if we take our awarded recipe for our flagship beer and leave it as it is? No barrels, no additions, just simple and plain like a nude body that wants to reveal itself. Oriel Quadrupel is rich and intense, neither sweet nor dry, a complex balance between malt sweetness, almonds, raisins, plums, biscuits, chocolate, yeast, phenols, and a warming feeling of alcohol. Luxuriate in, this beer is for you. So yeah, like we said, 10.3%. Quadrupel. One thing I should point out about this style as well is that it actually originated in the Netherlands. It was La Trappe who created the first Quadrupel, and that is Brouwerij de Koningshoven. I forget the town they're from in the Netherlands, but they're from the southern part of the country. So you could say, I've been talking about Belgian Abbey beers, but technically speaking, the Quadrupel is a Dutch Abbey beer. Although a few of the other breweries, West Vleteren and Rochefort, kind of copied the style a little bit later on. But yeah, 330ml bottle, this one. I have no idea what this would actually cost you if you bought it in Romania, because it was a gift. So yeah, we'll see about that. But yeah, I guess you'd probably pay maybe €3-4 for this in Romania. I don't know. Tell me about that in the comment section below. But yeah, the other thing we should point out about this, like I said, this is their flagship beer. But if you have a look on Untappd and you go into the Oriel Beer page and then just type in Quadrupel, you get about 12 versions or something of this. So they've done quite a lot of different barrel-aged versions of this. There's been a rum barrel-aged version. I think there was a Jack Daniel's barrel-aged version. They also had quite a few different Scotch whiskies in there. Auchentoshan is one that springs to mind, and there was a couple of others that were in there as well. And they'd also done a few different versions of this as well with adjunct and fruit additions, which I'm sure would be quite interesting. So yeah, it'd be cool to try a few of the Scotch barrel-aged quadruples if they still have any of them. But yeah, need to see if we can get a hold of that from one of the Romanian shops online or something. But I would love to try that. Being a Scot, I would love to try a Scotch whisky barrel-aged quadrupel from Romania. That would be a really random review to have on the channel. But yeah, like I say, there's been various different versions of this beer, but this is the OG original one, their flagship beer. So pretty cool. But yeah, as you can see, it's a 330ml bottle. It's one of these little dumpy stubbies, I guess you could say, that you often find with the Belgian beers. But let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting. I'm going to be careful with this because these styles of beer can be a little bit crazy sometimes. I've had ones explode on me before, and those were from here in Sweden. They weren't exported. But this one certainly seems to be behaving itself. So yeah, this one is the Oriel Beer Quadrupel, 10.3% ABV from Bucharest in Romania. So there we are. Let's go for it. So these beers can be very nice. I mean, they can lean in a few different ways. They can be a bit more kind of yeasty and bready. They can be more kind of brown sugary leaning. The brown sugars can be a bit darker and oily, or they can be a bit lighter and more kind of caramelly and wafery. And the fruits, of course, can be quite different as well, actually. So there's a lot of variety you can have in the quadruple style. But remember, with these Abbey beers, one of the tricks that they do in the brewing is the reason that these are often a bit lighter in the mouthfeel than, say, the imperial stouts and the barley wines and stuff, is that they actually add brew sugar into the boil, and that is what gets the alcohol content so high. It's not actually, you know, more malt content in a sense. They put that, and that's why your mouthfeel isn't quite as high either. But yeah, interesting stuff. But anyway, we've got the beer poured now, it's in the glass, and there we go. Incidentally, it does give you a little bit of a serving guide on the side, and it does say we should serve this in a sort of wide bottom, open top glass. Of course, I like the tulip because I think this is the best all round glass for lots of different styles. But anyway, if we shine the light through this beer, it's actually quite hazy. I'm not sure how well that's going to show up for you guys on the channel, but yeah, it's a very, very hazy one, this. One of the hazier ones I would say I've come across. But you know, this varies from brewery to brewery. Some of them will filter these beers, some of them won't. This one, I'm guessing, is unfiltered. But yeah, there's one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass there, but otherwise the carbonation is virtually kind of non-existent in this one. You can see there's a few little bits of sediment floating around in the beer, which you're going to get with one like this. There wasn't too much sediment visible in the bottom of the bottle, but it's all natural anyway, so who cares? But yeah, you can see little bits and bobs of particulate matter just floating around in this one. In terms of the colour, I would say that this one is a nice kind of rich, dark chestnut. If you shine the light through it, which I'm not sure if you'll see that on the camera, nah, it's too high. But if you shine the light through this one, it's got quite a bright, lighter chestnutty colour to it. But I think chestnut is definitely the best way to describe the colour of this one. So remember, when it comes to the colour of your beer, it's determined by 1, the type of malts that you use. This determines the magnitude of the colour. 2, the length of your wort boil also plays a role. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. And any adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour as well. We should say that a little bit about this because you can put different kinds of brew sugars in these quadruples, so that will affect the colour to a little bit, to a slight degree in this one. And of course, any fruits that you add in as adjuncts or whatever, and any barrel aging that you do will affect the colour of these as well. And it's a bit more pronounced in this beer because it is a more kind of mahogany type ale rather than an imperial stout, which is black, and you know, you're not going to notice that. But yeah, as you can see, very little head on this one. The head that was there was a very light kind of beige coloured thing. But in terms of appearance for a quadruple, not out with the realms of possibility. One of the hazier ones I've come across, but the exact colour and shade of this one is pretty much as you would expect. But yeah, let's take a closer look at the aroma of this one and just and see how we go. I don't think there's too much else we can say about the appearance, but let's go for it. Oh, that does smell really nice actually. First impression I'm going to say of this is actually quite a leathery. It's quite a leathery and quite woody quadruple, this one. I really find this one to be very, very leathery. So this is really interesting. I think this one has maybe potentially had a little bit of a longer boil. So this one, I don't know what the kind of standard length of wort boil is for a quadruple. It's not a style that I've ever tried to homebrew, but you know, imperial stouts and things will undergo boils of like 4 and 5 hours and things like that. And the level of caramelization that you can smell, that sort of leathery, cakey, brown sugary sort of thing you get out of this beer, I think this one's undergone a fairly long boil as well, to be honest with you. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this has had like a 4 or 5 hour wort boil to it. That wouldn't surprise me. But it smells very nice actually. It's a big boozy beast of a beer, this. So yeah, the backbone of this one is certainly really nice and kind of woody. You get a good bit of leathery character in there as well, like I said. But on top of that, you can smell these big, highly treacalized caramel, brown sugary notes in there. I really like that about this beer. This is one of the ones that it really lean, you know, you don't get too much kind of breadiness and stuff out of this one. Like quite often you'll get a kind of sweet, a big, sweet, kind of yeasty brown bread and bread crust and things out of this one. This is interesting because you get a little bit of that, but not a lot. This one really focuses more on the kind of cakey, brown sugary end of the spectrum. Absolutely. So like I say, you've got that big leathery sort of undertone to this beer. I don't get chocolate to this one, to be honest with you. Maybe just a little bit, like a kind of woody, chocolatey type element to it. But I mean, I really like how it goes about its business in that sense. It's as I say, the first word that came to mind when I was describing this one was leathery, and I would stick with that. So as I say, you've got these big leathery treacle molasses sort of things. You do get an element of a sweeter caramel to it. And I would say this one, it almost has a wee tiny hint of biscuit, but it's also got a little bit of like a kind of, it's almost like a caramel, a chocolate caramel brownie sort of thing. You get that kind of vibe out of this beer as well. It's really got quite a bit of that really thick brownie element to it as well. And I think, in fairness, the more that I smell this one, you do get a wee bit of a kind of dry chocolate out of this one. Not too high percentage cocoa, you know, a sort of 40ish% cocoa chocolate out of this beer. But I really like how this one goes about its business in that sense. A big leathery quadruple, this one. I have to say, this is quite unique compared to a number of other beers that I've come across in recent times, especially particularly within this style bracket, I should say. So this is very, very quirky. I'm really curious to see how this turns out in the flavour. So I'm wondering if that big leathery element that it has, I do wonder how much of that is down to the wort boil and how much of it is down to the yeast. But yeah, woody backbone, a lot of leather to it, as I say, big, highly caramelised brown sugars. On top of that, a bit of a kind of slightly dry, powdery chocolate layer, wee bit of sweet caramel on top potentially, and then maybe one or two little biscuit elements. I think this is going to be very, very quirky actually, but not, let's say, not too much of a bready element out of this one. On the hoppy side of things then, there's a wee bit of hoppy character to this, but remember these Abbey style beers are not the most hop forward, if you like. So you do get a tiny little bit of earthiness out of this one. There's a wee bit of a herbal character in there and the remnants of a sort of floral aromatic sort of thing and a bit of a lighter grassiness. You know, in terms of what hops they would use in this beer, potentially Northern Brewer from Germany, but you could use a kind of standard noble hop in this and get the same effect if you like. But the green component of this beer is quite smooth for me, but a quadruple, not the most hop forward of beers. But yeah, wee bit of earthy character, wee bit herbal, a little bit, you know, a wee tiny touch of a floral note and a slight grassy zestiness. The longer you keep this beer, of course, the more those aromas are going to drop out. But on the fruity side of things, this one is really interesting. I get a hell of a lot of date and prune out of this one. The fruity character in this beer is very much a dried fruity note. On top of that, you certainly get a little bit of a sharper raisin. And like I say, underneath you've got this datey, pruny sort of thing, and then quite a bit of a kind of thick, cakey element to it. I do get quite a bit of a sultana type note out of this as well, which is kind of interesting. But some nice lighter figgy notes in there, and a wee bit of a kind of blackberryish sharpness as well. So as I always say, currants are a bit more juicy. Blackberries tend to be a little bit kind of you know, sharper in a sense. They tend to be a bit more oily and sharp. But take a bit of time to ponder over the aroma of this one, because this is certainly quite quirky compared to the other quadruples I've had on the channel over the years, and that, I don't know what number that is now, but yeah, certainly a nice style, this one. I'm a sucker for these big brown sugar style beers, you know, the old ales, the barley wines, and the Scotch ales, the quadruples, the Doppelbocks as well. I love these kind of things. Doppelbock isn't an ale, I'll point that out. But let's have a taste of this one then and see how we get on. This is the Quadrupel Original Edition from Oriel Beer in Bucharest. Let's get stuck into this one. Thank you again to Mina for this. Let's go for it. Slanje, Skol, cheers, and as they say in Romanian, Noroc. Oh yeah. Now that's interesting. First thing I'm going to say about this beer, it comes across as, you know, very, very raw, if you like. It comes across as like a nice, raw, micro-brewed beer. That's one of the things I think that makes this a little bit special in a sense. It's a style that, you know, you don't come across too often outside of the likes of Belgium and the Netherlands and stuff like this. I've had one or two from here in Sweden from different breweries. I've had one from Scotland. I'm trying to think where else. Probably I can't. You know, it doesn't pop into my mind just now. I think I've had one or two from France as well. But yeah, this is really interesting. This one, it really has a little bit of that just raw, homebrewed type vibe to it. But I like it. I really do like this. So thumbs up to Oriel for this. I'd be curious to try a few of the barrel versions, of course, especially the Scotch ones. But we'll see. But yeah, it's one of these beers. It's one of these ones where the aroma really translates into the flavour very, very well. And I'll say you get a lot of the complexity in this beer on the aftertaste. This is a beer that really shows its colours when you go into the aftertaste. So let's try and break this down a little bit then and just see how we go. So straight away across that middle third of your palate, you can feel there's a nice sort of smooth woody quality there that goes right across the middle third of your palate. On that middle third of your palate though, you will notice that on the front underneath the front half of it, you will get a little slightly nutty aroma out of it and potentially a wee touch of vanilla, but as you move towards the back of that middle third of your palate, the woody character becomes just a little bit kind of drier in a sense. So I do like that about this. On top of that though, you get this really smooth, kind of almost quite thick, leathery sort of layer. You can feel that, and on top of that you've got the kind of smooth brown bready character. It's really interesting because the sort of leathery flavours and the brown bread are almost kind of very intertwined in a sense, just sitting on top of that woody backbone that the beer has. So yeah, the further you go into the aftertaste with it as well, you start to get a little bit of a kind of lighter bread crusty note. If you go to either end of that middle third of your palate, there's certainly a wee bit more of a kind of bread crusty note out of this beer, that's for sure. But yeah, the further you go into the aftertaste with this as well, the more cakey it gets. And we'll come to the cakey notes in a minute because I think they come out a little bit further forward. But as I say, on top of that sort of leathery, bready layer, you've got a mix. You get a little bit of a kind of sweet, cakey note out of this one. And then mixed in with that, you're getting a sort of light sort of powdery, dry chocolate in a sense, which I find really interesting. You get that layer, you do get that nice kind of layer of kind of powdery chocolate in there, and it's not too high a percentage cocoa. I mean, I think we're only talking about 40 or maybe 50% cocoa, but at the back of that middle third of your palate, you can feel it's a little bit drier and more bitter. But as you move further forward to the kind of front half of that middle third of your palate, you can feel it sort of sweetening up a little bit, but not by such a degree of magnitude. It's like going from 40% to 30% or something like that. It's definitely tastes a little bit more milky on that front half of the front third of your palate there. So yeah, I do like how that goes about its business in this beer. So yeah, the way that the cakey notes and leathery notes and stuff come out the further you go into the aftertaste with this beer as well is very, very nice. So on top of that middle third of your palate, then on top of that sort of chocolatey, cakey kind of layer, that's where you get the kind of brown sugars, and you can taste it. It's a very highly caramelised, treaclised brown sugar, this one. This has undergone a very, very long warp boil, I think, probably 6 hours, something like that. So you can really feel that, and I think that's part of the reason this beer feels a little bit sort of leathery in a sense. But if you go to the dead centre of your palate, it feels a little bit sweeter, but as you move further out from that, you certainly get a wee bit more of a kind of leathery flavour from it, and a wee bit more kind of biscuity and Vitis digestive like. So I do like how that goes about, that comes out, or that transpires in this beer as well. This one's got a lot of complexity to it, and you will find, as I say, that it opens up the more that you let it sit, the more you aerate it out, and the more you kind of focus on the aftertaste as well. That's it. I do wonder how this beer would age over time, and like I say, I'd be curious to see how it behaves in barrels, because the big sort of leathery note that this one has, for me, that's what really makes it stand out, and that's what makes it feel a little bit kind of more raw, and like it has that little bit of homebrewed vibe to it. You can tell this is a properly micro-brewed beer. I think that's awesome. This is brewed, I'm pretty sure, just from the vibe that you get from this beer, it's probably brewed in like a batch of like 500 litres, or maybe even less than that. But you can certainly appreciate that about this one. But I think that describes the middle third of the palate quite well in this one. Let's focus on the other parts of the beer. So border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you can feel a little bit of a bready kind of build up in there. Once again, there's a wee bit of a bread crust in the base of that back third of your palate. You can feel a nice sort of smooth, leathery kind of thing out of it. I really do like how that goes together. There's a bit of a kind of brown bready, cakey sort of thing in there. Then on top of that, you have a wee bit of a kind of roasty toasty brown sugary element coming out of this beer. you can certainly feel a little bit of a sweetness in there on this one. So the back third of your palate is quite interesting, this, but as you move further up, as you move above that, you can feel the more airy, yeasty character of this one. And I would say it's like quite a sweet, quite bright, brown bready character that comes out of this one in that sense. You can feel that more airy, yeasty note, but you get a few woody elements within that as well, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, as you come from the back of the palate, you can feel the flavour is a bit taller, but it condenses down as you go further forward, and you've got a slightly more condensed middle third of your palate. But the middle third of your palate actually feels remarkably thick in this one because of that bready, leathery sort of thing that I'm talking about from this beer. So yeah, one of the thicker quadruples I've had. Quite a lot of the time these are a bit more oily and slick in a sense, but this one certainly is a bit more leathery and thicker, which is cool. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of a smooth earthiness there. As you move further forward, the beer develops a little bit of a kind of herbal quality, and as you push towards the front corners of the palate, it remains quite smooth actually. It's a low IBU beer, this. We'll come back to that in the mouthfeel, but you do get a wee touch of floral aromaticity on the front corners of the palate, and around the front curve of the tongue it's a little bit lighter and more grassy in a sense. So I can certainly appreciate how that goes together. So yeah, the sort of the vibe that you get out of this beer, I think, is very, very nice. In that sense, the hoppy part of the beer and the sort of smoothness you get from it, it kind of is in keeping with that big leathery note that we've been talking about in this too. But on the front third of your palate then, you've got some really interesting fruity characters too. So let's look at this. Border region between front third and middle third of your palate. Once again, it's got a little bit more of a kind of, it has a little bit more of a, as I would say, it's got a little bit more of a kind of bready, it's got a little bit more of that kind of brown bready, bread crusty sort of thing to it, and I really like how that goes together in this one. But yeah, the fruity side of this, the leathery side of this beer kind of goes in with that as well. So that border region between front third and middle third of your palate is actually quite cakey, and that spreads into the back half of that front third of your palate, and underneath, as I say, you get a bit of that kind of leathery, woody sort of thing there, and on top of that you get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So on the back half of that front third of your palate, I would say you get a wee bit of raisiny sharpness on top, but it's actually remarkably sort of datey, pruny, sultana-like. There's a lot of dried fruit on the back of that, in the back half of that front third of your palate, and as I say, you've got a big cakey sort of note sitting underneath. But as you move further forward, you get a little bit more of a figgy note out of the beer, and as you move into the front half of that front third of your tongue, there's certainly a wee bit more of a black curranty note, and on top of that you get a little bit of a more kind of oily black berry vibe out of the beer. It's got a wee touch of sharpness to it that lingers into the aftertaste there. I'd be very curious to know which hop they've used in this one. Could it be a little bit of Bramling's Cross from England, or could it be a bit of Northern Brewer from Germany, something else? I really don't know, but the fruity characters you get with this one are it's remarkably dry, as I say. Sultanas, dates, prunes, a lot of that in there, sharper raisin, figgy, blackberry-like, and black kind of curranty in a sense. I like how this goes together. I do like how this beer goes about its business for sure. Very different from the other ones we've reviewed, and this is what we like on Rampant Lion Reviews. We like beers that are going to test my palate and see how they go. But yeah, I like this. Definitely sure you really get that micro-brewed vibe to this one though, I have to say, or nano-brewed vibe, I guess we could also say. But yeah, in terms of the mouthfeel, I think we've covered the flavour as much as we can. Mouthfeel-wise, it's definitely a full-bodied beer. The carbonation in this one is virtually non-existent, I would say that. I would certainly say that about this beer. So that's not a bad thing. It works for it. Maybe it could do with a little tiny touch of carbonation. I do wonder if the lack of carbonation, maybe they haven't used too much. Maybe they've actually focused more on the malt in this one rather than using the brew sugar in a sense, and that would make sense for the way that this beer goes together, because it's a big, thick, leathery type thing. So maybe they've put a hell of a lot of malt in this one and not put so much in the way of, you know, the brew sugar for the secondary fermentation. Maybe they haven't done that in this beer so much. That really would make sense with this mouthfeel, but it's certainly a kind of full-bodied beer. There's no question in my mind about that. The carbonation's non-existent, and it's got a big oily note to it. I don't know if I'd describe it as slick, because slickness usually means that it's, you know, fast moving and stuff, but this one certainly nice. Flavour profile wise, it has everything that you'd want. So the malty base in this one, as I say, is quite thick. The yeast and the malt really go together and thicken out this beer quite nicely. It's got a degree of sweetness to it, it's got a bit of smoothness, and as I say, for me, I find this one quite leathery. The fruity side of the beer is, it's got a lot of dried fruit character to it, I think, and a nice wee bit of oiliness, and a teeny wee bit of there's a teeny little bit of sharpness to this one, but not a lot. That's not oxidation or anything, incidentally. No, it's, you just get a wee bit of a kind of raisiny note and a blackberry note, I should say, sorry. And in terms of hoppy bitterness, this is quite low. I mean, we're talking maybe 15 IBUs, 20 at the absolute most, and that's standard for these quadruples. These are not very bitter beers in the slightest. But yeah, I think this is a really interesting one. I've enjoyed reviewing this beer. It's shown a different side to the quadruple for sure. As I say, a big leathery type thing, and on reflection I would say that maybe the yeast is playing a very, very big role in this one. This beer is all about the aftertaste, a very cakey, leathery, sort of treacly, yeasty thing, this one. But it gets a thumbs up from me. I can feel the alcohol going to my head a little bit with this beer now, but I'm certainly going to enjoy sipping away on the rest of this one. But yeah, really cool to be able to review this one for you, and as I say, I would love to try a few of the Scotch whisky barrel aged ones. So yeah, we can leave it at that for this. This one is the Quadruple, 10.3% ABV, which is about standard for a quadruple. You know, you're always talking about 10 to 10.5 for this style of beer. From Oriel Beer in Bucharest in Romania. I've enjoyed this. Thank you again to Mina for giving me this beer to review, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed my take on it as well. So yeah, thank you again for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Oriel Beer as well. And like I said, I do hope that we can return to these guys at some point soon. If they have a triple, I would love to try that as well, actually. But certainly cool to see that there is a Belgian style brewery in Romania already, but I would love to get down there and take a little look at it, but we'll see. Thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out Oriel Beer's social media, and I'll catch you later. This is their Quadruple, 10.3% ABV, definitely worth checking out. A very nice take on the style, I have to say. Slàinte, skål, cheers, and norok.